Alright, today I am going to teach you SQL. And the reason I'm doing this is that I've seen a lot of SQL tutorials online, and they tend to be pretty long, and it doesn't seem necessary to me. Because while it does take some time to get used to SQL, there aren't very many instructions that you would need to use on a regular basis. So, it seems like it would make sense to just give you all the instructions you need, and then I'm going to take that and run with it and get used to it over time. So this will be useful for anyone who's learning SQL for the first time or anyone who is familiar with SQL but wants a refresher on the different syntax on the way that you write things out. And I'll be able to do this because I'm going to write down everything that you need in a single query. So if you're new to SQL and you don't know what a query is essentially just a set of instructions that you give to SQL, and SQL interprets those instructions, and then it gives you a table of data. So let's get an example of this. And for this, I found this website. I just looked online for websites, places where you can just sort of play around with SQL. Because if you want to download it on your computer, it can be sort of difficult to work with. You have to set up the ability to access tables and things like that. So for learning purposes, it's best to just find a website that has a data set already loaded that you can just play with. So this website has a data set, and it is in a table, and the table is called patients. So we want to display everything in that table. So we're going to write select star from patients. And so what this is doing is select, this is an orange because this is a special word in SQL, and it says that it's going to retrieve data for you. The star means select all columns. And we're going to be selecting these columns from the patients table. So if we press enter, no, we have to press run over here. So we press run, we get this table, and we can see, so this is what the table looks like. We have patients, an ID number, just to identify each patient. Each patient will have a unique identifier, first name, last name. You can read through all of these. So, given this table, oftentimes the reason that you're using SQL is that you have a really large data set and you want to, you're really only interested in a small subset of the data set, or you need to sort of manipulate the data set in some way before using it. And so there are a number of instructions that you can use to do that. So let's just start going through different things that you can do. So we're going to select everything from patients, but let's say we don't want to select every row. Let's say we only want to select certain rows. So then we can say where, and then we can start listing some conditions that we want. So let's say that we don't want every single city here. Let's say that we only want cities that have the letter I in them. So what we can do is we can say where city like, and then this thing. So basically what this is saying is this is going to go through each row, and it's going to test if the value in the city column, so that's here, if that value looks like this or has this format. And what is this format saying? This format is saying that there is an I somewhere in the city. Because what these percent signs means is that this percent sign can be a placeholder for any characters that you could type. So basically, this represents any string, any sequence of characters where you have some characters at the beginning. It could even be no characters, but you have either no characters or some characters, followed by an I, followed by more characters. And so that's what this is saying. And so that's why you see that all of these cities, well, actually, I should go ahead and press run. And now that we press run, all of the remaining cities have an I in them. All right. So that is how we can look for cities with an I in them. But let's say we want to be more specific about what the city field is going to look like. Let's say we want an I, and then we want an L. Well, actually, just to show an example. So let's say we have, we want to look up cities that end in "ville." So one thing you could do is you could just look for the sequence ILL somewhere in the city name. If you run this, that's what you get. You get like all of these cities that end in "ville." You've also got this city that still has an ILL somewhere in it, but that's fine. Now let's say we didn't care what the middle letter was. We could replace it with an underscore. And then we get like the city Carlisle popping up here because it has an I followed by an S followed by an L. And that fits this description because it's some sequence of characters, namely CARL. Then there's an I, and then there's precisely one character. We don't care what it is, but there's one character, and so that will be the S. And then an L, exactly an L, and that's what we see. And then anything else at the end, and in this case, that's just going to be the final E. All right, and so now instead of before, let's go back and remove this. So before, when we ran it, we had how many results? Like 4,500. And now when we include this, we're down to like 240, just because there's only so many cities that have this pattern. And so any row that didn't have a city that matches this pattern, we threw it out. And you can actually look at this. So if you see patient ID here, the first row here has a patient ID of 5. So that means that the first 4 rows had cities that did not match this description, and so they weren't returned in this table. The 5th row has this city which matches this pattern, and so it's included in this table. All right, now if we want to include additional conditions here, like say we want to have the entry in the city column look like this, and we want something else, then we would type and then let's go with another example. Let's say we want to look at height, and let's say we want the height to be in a certain range. One thing we could do is we could say height is between 0 and 100, just for an example. So let's run this, and now we have like a very small number of patient IDs because this is a very specific range. Let's say we wanted to get rows where the height is either, it could be between 0 and 100, or it could also be greater than 105. So just as an example, let's see what that would look like. So we want height to be between 0 and 100, or height to be greater than 105. And we are going to put this all in parentheses because we want one of these two conditions to be true. We want height to be either between 0 and 100, or we want height to be greater than 105. All right, so let's run this, and we see we have a lot more rows now. And this is similar to the number of rows we had before, because basically this is just removing rows where the height was 101 to 104. So that would be an easier way to write this, but this works as well. Let's say we wanted to do something more specific. Let's say we also wanted height to not be a particular value. We could say and height is not And then let's just choose 47, just because we see that right at the top here. Let's run this. And I believe we have to do is not. There we go. All right. So we got rid of that row. And that shows you how you can use the word not, well, the words is not as well. All right, so far we have just included all of the columns that came with the table. Now let's say we wanted to include an additional column. Then we can just use a comma and then include another column name. So for example, if we wanted to have city appear again, then we could do this, and then you have all the columns appearing, and then you also have city appearing again. Now, there's no real reason that you do this, I just want to show you that you can. But what if we wanted to have another column that was more useful? Like, let's say, look, we have first name in this column and last name in this column. What if we just had a column just for name? And so what we would do is we would do concat first name, last name. And what this does is this will concatenate the first name and the last name. So let's run this and see what it looks like. There we go. We have concat first name, last name, and it looks like this. Now this looks a little weird because there's no space between the names, so we can actually just add that in. So let's add a space in quotes, and that will put a space between the first name and the last name. And so we can run that. Now the other thing that's annoying about this is this column name is, we don't want to have this really confusing column name, we just want it to be called name. So we will say as name. And this will rename the column with the word name. What else can we do? Let's say we wanted to have this table listed in a particular order. Then we would put at the bottom here, order by name. For example, we can order by name, and then we see all the names with A. We see this is in order of name. Now, this is going from A to Z. What if we wanted that to be reversed? We could go, instead of ascending, we could go descending. And now we start with a Z and go up from there. We also have 234 results here. Maybe we don't want to show all of the results. Maybe we only want to show like a small number of results. So we can say limit 110, and then we run this, and now we only see the first 110 results in the table. Now that we've seen some of the things that we can do as part of queries, let's talk about subqueries, because it turns out you can include additional queries within your query. So let's just make an example of this. All right, so one thing that we can do that I haven't talked about yet is, let's say we're looking at the names here. Let's just say the first names. We see that like William appears a couple times. What if we just want a list of all of the names that appear in the table? That's something we can do. We can do select first name from patients. But we don't want just a list of the first names, which is what this would give us. See, we see a list of all the first names here. And there's a bunch of duplicates, as you can see, because like when we order them, you can see that they appear here. So if we want just all of the individual unique entries in this column, we can say select distinct first name. If we run this, then we see all of the duplicates have been removed. All right, so I want to include this command here somewhere in this query. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to include another command in this section where we're telling which rows to include and exclude. What we're doing is we're going to just say and first name is in select distinct first name from patients. And you'll see that I've been hitting enter to put these things on different lines. That's not always necessary. It's just done to make this look nicer. And so for here, for example, because this is such a short query, I'm going to put this all in one line. And so, of course, when what this line is saying is make sure that the first name appears in the list of unique first names. But of course, every first name is going to appear in that list. So this isn't going to change the output of the query at all. The only reason I include this is to show you how to use select distinct within this query. So what if we wanted to do something with this table? So let's say we have information on height and weight. What if we wanted to generate some statistics? So like taking each city and looking at what the statistics look like for that city. This is something that we can also do. So what we're going to do is we're going to select city from patients. But let's say we wanted to, for each city, return how many patients are in each city. So here we have city. And now I'm going to improve count patient ID. So each row is going to count all of the patient IDs. But we need to tell it so if we're counting patient IDs, then that implies that we're grouping the data together in some way. And how are we grouping it? We're grouping it by city, because for each city, we are counting the patients in that city. So we have to include the phrase group by city. So now we run this, and we see we get each city, and each city name only appears once. And next to the city name is this field, count patient ID, which shows how many different patient IDs appeared in this city. And because each row has a separate patient ID, this is just going to give us the number of rows for each city. So this is the number of patients for each city. And again, this, like we talked about earlier, this column name is not very helpful. Well, it is helpful, but it looks weird. So let's just call it patient count, because this is the count of the patients for each city. All right. So we have this. We can also, count is not the only statistic we can generate. We can get an average height. And we're going to call this average height. We can get, we can sum things together, so we can get the sum. I need to include a comma here. We can do the sum of all the weights of all the patients in the city using this, and this we will call total weight. So we have average height. Let's say we also want the minimum and maximum height. So we can do min height as min height, max height as max height. All right. And we don't need a comma, or we can't have a comma there. All right. Another thing that we can do here is we can include filters like we did earlier. Like let's say that we don't want to count patients that don't have any allergies. So we see in the allergies column here, some patients have allergies, but some patients don't have allergies. And if they don't have an allergy, it's going to say null. And what this null means is that there is no entry there. So let's say that we only want statistics on patients who have allergies. So what we could do is we could say where allergies is not null. And so that's going to make it so that we don't consider patients that don't have any allergies. So if we run this, we see that the numbers change. Another thing that we can do is we can choose to remove rows from this table as well. So for example, we have cities and we have all these average heights. Let's say we want to get rid of cities with an average height that's really small. So we could say, we would want to say where average height is greater than 120. But what we have to do is we have to write this as having. Average height is greater than 120. All right, and so this is an important distinction. First of all, let's run this and show that this gets rid of the 180. All right, or 118. All right, so now this is an important distinction. We have where and we have having. Both of these are removing rows, but it's important to keep in mind where they're moving rows. So basically what this query is doing is at this point in the query, like from patients, the patients table has one row for each patient. And when we say where allergies is not null, this condition is removing rows from the patients table before it lets us work with it. So this will remove rows where allergies is not null before doing anything further. Then after those rows have been removed, we group by city and we generate all of these statistics based on city. After we have made all these statistics and we now have this table that has one row for each city, we are removing some of the cities based on this condition. We are removing the rows from this new table that we have. And these functions, average, min, max, sum, these are all called aggregate functions. So the word where applies to standard tables, and the word having applies to tables after you have applied an aggregate function and used group by. This is a confusing topic, so you can look at other tutorials on this, and you can look around and sort of mess around with the data to understand this as well. But yeah, this is how this works. So let's say we want not just city. Let's say we also want to see province ID. Can include this in here as well. So now we have this aggregate table. What would be nice is if for each patient, we already know their city, but what if we could also see in this table here, all of those statistics from here? That is something we can do. And we can do that using, can use that by joining the tables. So from patients, this is what this is going to look like. We are going to write left join, and then we are going to insert some table here on, and then we're going to use some conditions to explain how we're going to join these. Okay, so let's go through what this looks like. We have this left join, and after join, you need to, so patients is going to be involved in this joining of tables. We want to involve a second table as well, and that table name is going to go here. But in this case, we don't have a table name. We want to generate the table from a query. So what we're going to do is here, we are going to paste this entire query. All right, so we are going to take this table of patients and we are going to join this table to it. Now we're going to want to refer to this table. So this table has a name, it's called patients. We want to give this table a name as well, the table that results from this query. So we are going to say as, we're just going to call it city info. So city info is the name of this table of the table that is generated from this query. All right. So we are going to join it. Now, if you want to combine the two tables, you need to tell SQL how to match up the rows. So we have, let's say we have this row here and we have this row here. How do we match up these rows? Well, what's common between them? We have city and we have province ID in this table and in this table. And again, that's if you remember, that's what I mentioned we wanted to do, is we wanted to get city information for each patient. So it makes sense that we would want to use the city information to link the two tables. So we need to tell SQL which columns have the same information. So the patients table has a column called city, and we also have a column called city in the city info table. So this is what this is going to look like. Patients.city. Now this is referring to the city column, but we have to put patients dot here to specify that we're referring to the city column in the patients table, which is different from the city column in the city info table. And so this is how you tell SQL if there is any ambiguity in terms of which table a column is coming from. You can use this notation to tell SQL which table to bring it from. And then this equal sign here is saying that basically these values here can be linked with these values here. So what this is going to do now is, so this is a left join, and I'm not going to go through the details of the difference between all of the different joins. That does require more of a discussion, so I'm going to leave that to other tutorials. But the idea here is that when you say left join, what the SQL query is going to do is it's going to first generate this table, and then it's going to go through and say, okay, let's start with the first row. We want to join information from the other table here. So let's figure out how to do that. So we're going to look at the city entry here. So this is Beamsville. So now we're going to go into this other table here and we're going to look up Beamsville. Okay, we found it. So let's take all of these, let's take this entire row of data and let's add it on to this row. And then it will go to the next row and do the same thing. This is Brockville. Let's go here. Let's find Brockville. Found it. Let's take this row and include all of that information here as well. So that's fine. Now you'll notice some things. First of all, Brockville here appears twice. And so the information that's added in this row is going to be the same as the information that's added in this row, because both times SQL is going to go and look up the same row here in this table and then join that information as well. Now the other thing to keep in mind is that because this is a left join, if we find a city here and we look in this table and we don't find that city, then what's going to happen is there's nothing to bring in, and so it will just have a bunch of nulls. Let's run this and see what this looks like. Ambiguous column name, city. So remember, SQL needs to know if this column is coming from the patients table or the city info table. And we see we use the city column again here. And so we need to tell SQL that here we're looking at the patients table. So this has to be patients.city. So now we run it and it works. All right, so now notice that we can scroll this table to the right now, and we have these things. We have average height, min height, max height, total weight.
And these all came from this table, and they were joined here. Now, if we scroll down here, I'm wondering if we see any examples. But basically, if we had a city here and there was no entry in this table, then what would happen is these entries would say null, just like what we have here. They would say null because it couldn't find that city in this table, and so there was nothing to put in there, so it just put blanks. All right, another thing to keep in mind is that there might be situations in which when you're joining tables together, one column is not enough information. So let's say we had, I will just do an example here. So I will say, and patients.province ID equals city info.province ID. I'm going to include this on another line. Okay. So now when we run this, this has no effect because each city had a unique province. But you can imagine a situation in which, like, maybe there are two provinces that have the same city name. And so in that case, just joining on city would lead to some ambiguity, and you could run into issues in your code. So if you need to use more columns when joining tables to be more specific, you can do that, and this is how you do that. All right. What else do we want here? It's also worth noting we have ordered by name, but you can also order by some of these numeric values. So we could order by, for example, patient count. And really, because this query is saying where allergies is not null, these are statistics really only about patients with allergies. So let's just call this allergic patient count. And we will put that here as well. All right, so what is it going to do when we order it like this? So let's run it. So the first thing it's going to do is it's first going to order by allergic patient count. So that's why we have 1 in all of these entries, and then it increases as we go down. But then for whenever there are similar values here, it will then order by name. So here for all the patients that have, or for all the rows corresponding to a city with 1 allergic patient, the names are descending. That's why it goes like T, then S, then L. It's going in reverse alphabetical order. All right, so we see that we are ordering by patient count first and then by name in reverse alphabetical order. All right, so this is the query. This query has everything that you need. Now, having a background in mathematics, you really learn to avoid absolute statements. So obviously there is a lot more to SQL that you can learn, but really if you work with SQL, 99% of all the queries that you're going to do are going to use some subset of these instructions. And usually you're only going to use a few instructions. But this is an example where you have all of the instructions, all of the really important instructions in one place, so that when you need them in the future, you know not only where to find them, but also importantly, what order to put them in. Because, like I know, for example, it definitely, some of these have to be in a particular order. So order by needs to come after where. And so looking at this particular example can also help you remember what order these things need to go in. But yeah, this is a really great reference query that you can use to write your own queries and to remember how queries need to be written, what your options are for writing queries, what you can do with SQL. So I really hope that this query is useful, and there you go.